Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
One of the things that is most easily overlooked in water is just how big it is. And we mean Lake Michigan and the Nile and the Amazon basin and all the big things. But cash flow is just as big, if not bigger, than actual flows, and all that cash needs to be managed. As you will hear, $500 billion a year flows through US utilities of all stripes alone, coming from customers, governments, NGOs, and other sources into those utilities, then out to employees, service providers, utilities, chemical suppliers, consultants, all day, every day. And that $500 billion is handled through software that is problematic, old, expensive, inflexible, poorly designed, especially in under-resourced utilities. Nobody has successfully built the software to help them manage these flows as efficiently as possible. Nobody, until Barrett Hansen and the team at Current arrived to build a platform to solve one of the more obvious and vital workflows in utility management, aiming squarely at those under-resourced utilities. Now live with 60 customers, Current is up there with the fastest growing companies we have backed, and Barrett is a very smart, very humble guy. I have a soft spot for people who went to graduate school in Cambridge, Allston, actually. Please enjoy my conversation with Barrett Hansen. Barrett Hansen, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Tom. How are you doing?
Very good. Very good. I want to talk about money. It's not usually the initiating topic of conversation, but you find yourself as a conduit for a very large amount of it. How much money passes through domestic utility hands annually? And do you know how much passes through hands internationally?
So when we started the company, the research at the time, about 2 years ago, was $500 billion a year goes through the US utility market, whether it's electric, gas, or water. I think global will probably be about 10 times that, so maybe in the order of 5 trillion. Anybody who's looked at their utility bills, especially electric bills, recently probably feels like it's gone up about 30 or 40% in the last 2 years. So, maybe 700 billion and 7 trillion, I don't know. But it is quite a lot. And all of it is ratepayer based, right? So it's the people paying for those services, right? Water, electric, gas, et cetera.
The dirty secret of pretty much everywhere in water. I remember being at a meeting in, I think it was 2015. I'd been working specializing in early stage water with Imagine H2O for about 6 months. And we were in a meeting in Berkeley and somebody asked how many people know what they pay for their water bill. And even with a group of water professionals, 10% of people put their hands up. It was crazy and it hasn't changed. Nobody has any idea. It's just an extraordinary scale that you're going after. Walk us through, and I'm already laughing, walk us through on the water, wastewater, obviously stormwater side of things. How is that money flow managed?
Probably either more manually than you expect or exactly as manually as you expect, depending on, whatever recent experiences you've had with your utility. But yeah, the bills are often created in-house, right? Everybody uses a certain amount of water every month, every 2 months, every quarter. That's kind of the cycles that utilities are going to bill out. They'll send you a bill, which is often a paper bill, people moving increasingly to e-bills, but not all utilities. And then you'll pay that ideally online if there's an option for it. But a lot of people, either by choice or because the utility doesn't offer any sort of online pay option, they're going to write a check, send in the mail, or sometimes come by with cash. This is something that is a lot more prevalent than you'd expect and something we notice every time we're either talking to utilities on the phone, right? They'll just kind of interrupt us, be like, hey, we got to pause a demo. Somebody just came in with $100 and we have to take their payment at the counter. Or
What?
if you're visiting on site, it sounds crazy, but especially in rural areas, it's part of people's daily, weekly routine, right? They go, they pay their bills. They just kind of don't want to pay for postage, I guess. There's just some principle. Like, I don't want to have to put anything in the check. I don't want my information online. I'm going in.
What do you want?
Right. But we pay those fees because we want the convenience, right? And a lot of people kind of see it the opposite way.
So your customers have this sort of spider's web of things that they need to do in order to essentially handle their lifeblood. And given the
For sure.
proliferation of every kind of payments platform that you can imagine, why do you think you still have the opportunity that you have at Current? It seems like it's sort of this huge idea hiding in plain sight that we've been looking out for. Before you arrived, we've been looking out for someone like you for literally years. Why is it still around? Why is it still around as an opportunity?
Yeah, it's great to hear. Feel coming into an opportunity that you guys already saw existed. But yeah, I think like when you separate out how you pay and then how you track, I think that can create a lot of friction, especially for the small districts that are out there. Our product, just backing up, is what's nominally called in the district or in the industry a utility billing system. Its primary purpose is to produce the bills and track what everybody owes at the utility. But I kind of think of it more as a CRM, right? It's basically just your database of customers that you have for the utility. It's the screen that if you call in or you walk in, the utility administrator is going to be looking at to see all the notes, all the service history, all of those things. And as a byproduct of it being your system of record for the utility, it should have workflows for these kind of common tasks, right? How do I take a payment? How do I produce the invoices? How do I add miscellaneous fees and charges and those kinds of things? So what we went and did is not only had this as a utility facing side, but had a customer facing side as well, right? So an online payment portal that's directly linked in and can simplify that collection process for the utility so that they're not totally relying on checks and cash and all these things, which each check payment, each cash payment on its own is, relatively quick, a matter of seconds. But when you have to do hundreds or thousands every month, it really adds up.
Did you, when you were sort of talking to your customers for the first time, I mean, maybe the best place to start is like, how the hell did you find out about this? I mean, you were minding your own business, going to all sorts of rather good schools and all the rest of it. And you happened upon this. How?
It did start at HBS. I was in business school back east. And, my jobs before then were in, I would say like sexier areas like Fintech, where I think a lot of people, you read about it in the news, it seems like, really growing, interesting industry. And I think the problem that you can run into there is a lot of other people see the same thing, right? And so the competition can be really fierce, right? A lot of new entrants, a lot of smart people, all focused on the same kind of set of ideas of what's really hot. I mean, think AI right now. Think about all the talent flowing into those types of industries. I just was really fascinated, not learning necessarily about water in particular, but how many great companies there are out there in industries that you never hear about in the Wall Street Journal. You don't know anybody working in them, but extremely profitable, well-run, very interesting companies in niche industries, right? Maybe a secondhand airplane manufacturer or any kind of idea you can think of. You could still have a really interesting career and have really interesting problems and work with interesting people in those kinds of areas. So after a couple of years, when I was looking for ideas to start, I wanted to go farther afield than the industries I'd been in, B2B SaaS in Silicon Valley and Fintech. And my wife works in solar, actually. So that's where I started was, it was the pandemic time. So we basically were on each other's Zoom calls. I felt like I knew everything about what she was doing on a day-to-day basis, maybe more so that is healthy, but gave me a head start to kind of look into the industry a little bit, see what was going on. A lot of interesting stuff with digital twins. And what I kept running into actually was that the utilities were dictating a lot of the software decisions. I was really looking at software, which is where I had a lot of experience, but feeling like, hey, there's got to be something here. This is a growing area. There's renewables. There's a lot of stuff happening. How can software create efficiencies? And with the amount of concentration in the electric market with utilities, it made me very nervous. I wasn't sure if there was really anything there. But then I got a tip that in water, there's actually 50,000 water utilities and 90% of them, so 45,000 are under 10,000 service connections. That kind of flipped something for me on just, hey, this is a much different profile of market. There's a lot more SMBs. Let's go to visit some and see what they're using. And so the first couple utilities I visited, first of all, way friendlier than I expected. People were totally willing to let a complete stranger come visit to see what was going on, which is another great sign. You're working with great people. But you see that they're using software, but also like a lot of Post-it notes on the desktop, which is like little reminders for how do I actually use the software? And I just thought about my own life, and I don't have Post-it notes for how do I use Amazon? How do I use social media? Like these things are intuitive. These things should be very like easy to use. It just seemed like an obvious opportunity for, hey, there's got to be a way to deliver like a low cost, easy to use, simple to install, cloud-based system that can really make a difference for these utility managers.
Oh my God, this is an absolute tsunami of questions. So when you first went to go and see the people within the utilities, it's so interesting that you felt this breadcrumb, not only of everybody always throws, says like water is fragmented, therefore it's bad. And I'm always like, well, I don't know. It's actually quite useful from a certain point of view, which you immediately saw. So it just made sense to you off the bat. It wasn't like you were being actively contrarian. The concentration of the energy industry made you nervous because you had like 40 utilities that you could go after, and you saw this much larger number as something that you could like go and attack. Is that the best way of characterizing it?
Yeah. And I think this is maybe where it comes into how we're going to finance this new venture, right? I think I'd been circling the idea of starting a company, being an entrepreneur for a while. And I'd always been kind of right up on the edge because kind of nervous about what could this mean for my life? What are our chances of success? And, knowing as a first-time founder, not from this industry, I'm not going to be able to go out and raise a $10 million, $100 million seed round to go do this. Like we'd probably be working with like $1 million first round. So how are you going to be able to raise that amount of money? How are you going to be able to build a team and get to market in the amount of time that you're afforded, right? And long sales cycles is kind of the reputation of utilities. I think there's a lot of heavy lifting by the electric and gas industry on that reputation. I think in the water industry, you can actually be a lot quicker. And we have good reasons why we think we can do that on a consistent basis. But I felt like, hey, with these basic SMB type customers, I can get to know them on an individual level. We can build a product that seems to work for like a small cohort of people, get our first 5, first 10, first 15 customers, and know that we could scale this up, right? Because there's so many more buying opportunities later. So really thinking about that iterative startup approach, how can we get in, prove our concepts, prove that we have a go-to-market formula, and then be able to scale up in the way that I think is expected of technology founders in this day and age.
You narrative violations all over the place, and maybe we'll get through them all by the time we get to the end of this. But one of them, which is really great, is that there isn't a sort of an explicit really assumption in the water market, is that people kind of guard their billing system kind of with their life. It's one of the places that they are least likely to be doing anything new. But it sounds like you managed to relatively quickly find exactly the opposite. Can you just talk us through that sort of sequence of reality, getting through those kind of like first 15 customers? What did it feel like? And if the kind of pull from the customers wasn't natural, how did you instigate it?
Yeah, I think the first principle I would start with is on average, a utility will have their billing system for about 10 years, which if you think about the inverse of that, that means 1 out of 10 people are looking for a new system every year. So if it's not the year they're looking, they're probably displaying that kind of protected behavior that you just described, right? They don't want to just to switch. And that's going to be the case for anybody selling into utilities. There's a natural conservatism. There's a natural desire to maintain things that work, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We have to focus on reliability. We're not trying to introduce risk into the system. So you're kind of always up against that. But there is a natural upgrade cycle that will happen, right? People do change, 1 out of 10 people every year. And so trying to identify the reasons why that might be the case. Some of it's just very natural with the vendor that they have already, right? They might be sunsetting a version of the system that the utility is on, and they need to either upgrade with their existing vendor, which often is not a seamless experience. It's often actually a somewhat painful experience because it's a total new version of the software. They've rewritten it from scratch. They're trying to move to cloud. They're trying to do some sort of pseudo cloud thing versus an on-premise software that they had before. And so it's a whole new implementation, a whole new set of fees, a new subscription, and that kind of triggers a buying process, right? Hey, let's go out and get 2 quotes and see if this is really the one we want to commit to for the next 10 years. So that would be kind of one example that would make people wake up every 10 years. And the part that I really like about that is it fits with the volume strategy, right? You have 50,000 utilities out there. You don't have to be reliant on, hey, I need to make this sale. This is the right fit for me. Like you just have to think about it a little bit broader, right? Build a nice funnel. Think about spreading out over a couple of states, over the whole country if you can, and make sure that you have enough possible opportunities to hit the numbers you need to hit.
But you also had a cold start problem, right? Is that like when you're going up to people for the first time and you don't have any reference, like every entrepreneur is going to be able to like speak to this experience. But can you talk us through how you kind of dealt with that? Because this is literally the lifeblood of the organization being put into the hands of somebody who's never done it for anybody else before.
That definitely was tricky. I think we were lucky to stumble across a group in California called the Mutual Water Company Collective. It's kind of an interesting history, but basically I think of it as from an era in Western expansion, 1800s, before you had public utilities in towns, you would just have basic groups of people that would get together and say, hey, one person's going to build a well and we're going to need money from people to fund this project and then distribute water. And so those people would become shareholders. And those organizations persist to this day as mutual water companies. In other states, they might go by different names, but basically there's a number of them, a couple hundred around California, some of them in the city of Los Angeles, essentially the county of Los Angeles, just like a random patch in there that's a shareholder owned, technically private water company. And these companies, because they have kind of a unique structure, they have shareholder management, certain reporting requirements, they're relatively close knit. And so we found a group of customers and prospects, I guess, at that point, that were all kind of in this group together that spoke to each other. And we did notice, like, initially we wanted them to be design partners, right? We'd say, hey, we'd love to meet with you every couple of weeks. We want to show you what we're building. It seems like you think there's a need. No pressure to buy anything, but like, just give us advice. We'd love to hear. And people are really engaged on that. I think there's a nice camaraderie in this industry where even if people aren't interested in buying, and we had a number of those people that said, look, I'm never going to buy from you, but like, I want to help the industry. I think more innovation needs to happen. I love what you're doing and I want to support you with my time. We're so grateful to all those folks that did that for us. But as we started building and we could see like lights going on behind people's eyes and people seeming pretty interested by what we were building, you start to approach them, say, hey, we're looking for our first 5 beta customers. We really want to get this off the ground. Would you be a part of that? And in that dance, there's definitely a lot of back channeling happening. Lisa's asking, is Ken doing it? Ken's asking, is Karen doing it? And they're all kind of circling between each other. And so you have to kind of try to push them all together and create that kind of group trust, I guess, between everybody. And so that's a great, I guess, maybe recommendation I'd make for folks in the future is know that utilities, unlike other industries, they're not competitive. If anything, they're extremely collaborative. They share information. So you're definitely not going to be able to get away with like giving them different pricing. Just be honest, be straightforward, and see if you can kind of leverage that group mentality to help get your project off the ground.
It's such an interesting example of a segment. There's a definition of a segment that I still think is about the most important thing out there in terms of building startup companies, which is it's a group of people that share a similar pain point, that talk to each other and experience that pain so acutely that they are willing and able to pay for an imperfect solution now to solve at least some of that pain. I won't unpack all 9 active elements of that sentence, but it's such an interesting place to happen upon it. So that solved your cold start problem. That's super interesting. But it's not like you found it slow going. You're one of the faster go-to-market motions that we've seen, particularly in the utility sector. Just walk us through how you think about it, some of the playbooks that you've learned that you think are quite interesting within utilities. Maybe this is just a function of pain. People have a predilection to go fast. How have you been able to achieve the pace that you have?
We've achieved a nice pattern recently in terms of our growth, but we actually had a couple of dead quarters there in the middle. After we got our first 5 or 6 customers, there's definitely a dead zone of people wanting to see what happened, right? Let's see it get live. And then after that, an initial go-to-market mistake we made was we tried to kind of continue tapping into the same network to a point that wasn't really making a lot of sense. Like we thought, hey, we just got 5 mutual water companies. Let's get the next 10, 15. Like they'll all see that one person did and want to jump in too. But the mistake we made was that those 5 people, they raised their hand because they had that urgent need at that moment. The other folks that didn't raise their hand initially, even though we knew them, they weren't actually in the market right now. Like they had just switched 5 years ago. They were going to be another 5 years from there. So we spun our wheels for a while, just trying to continue to tap a market that maybe was a little bit saturated. And we really had a breakthrough when we brought somebody in to do some cold calling and just kind of explore other regions. And we found a couple hotspots around the US that we really doubled down on that I would characterize as having, very acute buying triggers. So distinguishing that from pain, where I think a lot of the folks that we've been talking to all share the same pain. Did they have a reason that they were looking to switch right now? And a big source of that is something I mentioned already, but that vendor-induced urgency. Like if there's a problem with their existing vendor, that's a big issue. It's one thing to say, hey, this is a little bit annoying. I'm taking more time than I want to on this. But once you actually introduce risk into their operation so that I can't produce my bills once a month, my bills might be wrong. This is extremely stressful for a utility. It's this interesting flip where when you think about the focus on reliability, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like normally you think of that as a negative for the vendor because how do I convince them that change is good? The way it can kind of turn around on itself is that if their existing vendor is not delivering, they have to get their bills out. Like it's oftentimes like in the statutes of the district, of the town, like we bill on the 29th every month. And, you can get fired if there's operational problems on a consistent basis. So they're ready to move away from that other vendor and move towards somebody new. So if you can find those pockets, you can get a little bit of market intelligence of where people are struggling and where you can be that helping hand. You're going to find people that want to see 2 demos in a week and propose to their board the following week. And now you have a customer.
And go. Can you just say a little bit more about the sort of discovery and finding those hotspots? And you said it was a function of cold calling. Was it just literally a function of increasing the intake of information at the top of the funnel and then really making sure you were paying attention?
Yeah, exactly. Like that iterative approach of like, all right, here's a list of cities or districts that seem like they're in our ICP, right? Ideal customer profile. Let's hit those. And then where are we seeing people wanting to take the calls? What are they? Hey, there's a lot of people using XYZ vendor. Is there something we can pull online about which customers are using that? Something that works for us, it might not work for all companies, but if you have an online payment portal, right, that's a public URL, right? So you can kind of identify who's using what vendor, right? So we can use that and layer it on to our HubSpot data sets basically to say, hey, let's focus on people in these states with these vendors, et cetera, and just see, hey, we heard there's some sort of transition issue, like version 6 of XYZ vendor is causing a lot of people trouble. Like, are you in that category, right? It's a very targeted message. And they'll tell you like, yeah, definitely cause us problems. What do you got? Can you help? And this is where I think cold calling is so valuable because a lot of people don't really check email in this industry. They're not really on LinkedIn, but they are on the phones. Our buyer is the administrator of the utility. They're often doing customer service. So they're kind of waiting for their customers to call. So they're going to pick up the phone. they'll hear our message. And so that makes it a lot easier to get in touch with them. And they're not always as familiar with buying. So if you think about if you buy every 10 years, this person might not have been there the last time they made this buying decision. So they're not necessarily as practiced at going out and finding new services. And so if you can just get to them, you might be sole sourcing it or be only up against the existing vendor that we already know they don't like.
Immediately, what it makes me think of is that once you have this profile and you've got this extremity of pain and somebody that has the predilection to say, as you say, like, yes, this is not good. And need now. You need to put something in front of them that it's not just, is it a question of just being good enough? I mean, what I'm getting at is the product and the design decisions that you put in place. You obviously can't build the full suite out of the gate. Well, you can say more about kind of the criticality. But I'm just really interested in the sort of sequencing of design decisions and the features and kind of the UI, UX that you had in place for people who were used to dealing with, let's be charitable, fairly crap software already. So how did what you learned filter into especially your initial product decision?
So in the MVP we created, right, we tried to do like a lean startup method. We did struggle a little bit with a somewhat broader surface area than we expected. We kept finding that we needed to build a little bit more. We couldn't just build a couple core modules and have it be good enough. I mean, there was a certain expectation that a certain number of modules, like not just billing, customer management, service orders, increasingly more things touching the field would all be covered in the system, or you'd be leaving the utility hanging and they'd have to replace you with multiple vendors, which is always a tough sell.
Yeah,
go from one to many is not easy. One of the things that was kind of a surprise was during our process, we were initially not going to build a customer payment portal, right? An online payment portal where you can view your bills, pay your bills, and then even view your usage. We're going to save that for a fast follow. And pretty much all our initial customers said, I think we would only go with you if you would had this all in one, because that was solving a real pain point. A lot of people had only a billing system, which was separate from the payment processor, which meant that you had to kind of sync those things every day, right? So for a customer to log in online and see what their bill is, see what their balance is, it needs to be like synced on a nightly basis with their billing system, because it's actually two separate companies managing that. And even that can be not a great experience, because a customer might pay a bill and then go online and nothing's changed. Well, you got to wait till the next day for it to update. So you're calling in, asking questions. So that's solving a real pain point to bring those all together. So that's kind of how we went initially. And I would say my observation, especially once we went broader. So remember, our initial customers saw us when we had nothing, right? When we were just the people coming in their office, looking at the Post-it notes, asking them like, what's a water table again? They kind of always had that relationship with us. But when we first went out to market, cold calling, and they don't know that we're a new company. They just know of what we have. I think having a cloud native, mobile responsive app, it just kind of caught everybody's attention. You're not really seeing a lot of that in terms of just the visual of what a modern app looks like, right? It's nothing crazy. I think our team and our designers did a really nice job, but it's what we all expect, I think, on this call from your modern social media, your e-commerce, whatever you're getting, that type of framework, which just stands out a lot versus an on-premise system. So you see that, you see the ease of use, you see how quickly you can kind of navigate around, and it immediately kind of sets the tone for, hey, this is something a little bit different from what I've seen before. And I can really see how this is going to save me a lot of time, as long as you said, it kind of covers those basic things like, hey, can I get my bills out? What intelligence can you provide me about who's late? As long as you can kind of hit those bare minimums, I think people start to gravitate towards what seems easier to use.
The baseline of where people are starting from is like super helpful. Putting it up next to, I'm sure a lot of your like peers from your previous startup world, in order to be materially better, what you're able to provide is something that's relatively straightforward, which is also super helpful, right? This is what's easy to build. It's easier to maintain, especially as you said, if you're trying to build this on relatively limited budget. Can I go back to your enforced parsimony for a second?
You have to explain what that is first.
Oh, sorry. So having to be cheap. You'd made the assumption that nobody was going to be tripping over their shoelaces to give you all the money in the world, which may or may not have been frustrating in kind of AI land. But you obviously were trying to make good judgments about the spending of the marginal dollar in terms of building the team and building the product. Can you just go a layer kind of deeper on that and tell us how that manifested in your life as a founder, saying, we've got to build this, but we've got to build this on a shoestring?
My co-founder, Jin, and I were very aligned on this in a lot of ways from the beginning. When we decided to jump into this, Jin mentioned that his ideal company is Craigslist from like a company building standpoint, not necessarily for the product that they have. But
speaking of UI, UX.
Exactly. Like there's a lot there that's maybe different from what we're trying to do from the product. But from a team perspective, I think they have a crazy amount of revenue, like $1 billion and 50 people on the team, right? So how did they achieve that? They really focus on what mattered. And in their case, UI did not matter that much, right? They were able to keep the team lean by not really updating their website in like maybe 20 years or whatever it is, because people still want to use that service for what it offers. So just really thinking critically about where are we devoting the resources that we have so we can keep the team kind of tight knit. We are a remote team, which does add some challenges, but we try to do as much as we can to stay collaborative, stay connected, whether it's traveling or whether it's just using digital tools to get together on a regular basis. So that was really important to us in terms of how we built the company and making sure that we were focused on really what mattered. And so early on, it was all engineers and then me. I was selling. We just recently hired more salespeople because we just had a nice investment round. We have a little bit more money to spend and think that can fuel our growth. Also, my calendar is becoming the bottleneck for new sales. There's only so much one person can do. So we need to scale it up a little bit in terms of driving new business.
On the sales side of things, had you done sales before? Is this something you had to learn cold?
Yeah, I learned cold.
What did you learn and how did you learn it?
So the perspective I came into it from, the closest I'd been to sales was in sales operations. So I'd seen how funnels worked. Like, you need to think analytically about this, right? You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you need to win a certain deal that's in front of you. You need to know that there's a certain conversion rate across the stages. And so it really starts from the top in terms of having the right top of funnel. I really struggled with cold call. It was very hard, very unnatural. I would totally overthink every single, I'd do 10 minutes of research, then I'd call and it would go to voicemail. I'm like, damn it. I had all this great information. I had a great one-liner for this person. I don't even get to use it. So that was the hard learning of just saying, look, you got to keep it. You got to get to 50 calls or 100 calls or whatever your goal is per day to actually generate the volume. But it did really help to bring in somebody that had done that before, kind of had that thick skin to be able to kind of generate the pipeline. And then I think I did well on the demos because just as any founder has, you have this kind of natural passion for the product. And I wouldn't have thought that. I mean, people told me that and I was like, I'm still going to be awkward on the call, but it just kind of comes out. Like, people ask you a question and you just get like really excited in a way that they probably haven't seen before from a salesperson. They're like, wow, this salesperson's like nerding out over deduct meters. Like, why? And it's like, well, because we just built it last week and I'm really excited you asked about it. So there's just kind of this natural, I think, affinity that I don't have to tell them that I'm a founder on the call, but I think they kind of can tell that I'm like way too into the product, I guess, while I'm trying to sell it to them.
Well, people respond to that. You're so right about that. I can sort of like feel viscerally the experience you went through and the kind of the thickness of the skin. I have such admiration for people who are real pros at that vertical of the company building, because it's totally indispensable and really hard.
And I would have loved if we could just send a bunch of emails and have people come to us. It just wasn't the reality for us. We just kind of have to get out there and kind of take your lumps. But again, if you do it enough, you can start to see the numbers, right? You can see, hey, we convert 2% of the calls we make show up as a demo, then, whatever percent go on to the next stage and whatnot. So that's always encouraging. And you know that you can try to improve your quality of your data, right? And that's going to create lift as well. So you just, once you get it going, you can see, hey, this is just a process to optimize, just like anything else. So it helps a lot.
Obviously, at the end of this is a contract with your utility. How did you think about the diagnosis of kind of willingness to pay and pricing? You don't need to go into kind of concrete numbers, but what I'm more interested in is kind of the principles.
Yeah, we felt like we had to scale with service connection count. I mean, that's basically a pretty good correlation for revenue. I mean, my general rule of thumb that I'd say is maybe about $1,000 per service connection per year is what you can expect as a utility. Now, it's going to vary by geography. We have customers in California whose average bill is $200. That would be $2,500 per customer versus in the Midwest, it might be $50. So it's definitely going to vary. But when you keep that in mind, you want to think about what is the budget for this utility going to be? It's a relatively high fixed cost industry. We all pay for water based on how much we use. Like, for those of us who have looked at a water bill recently, which I do all the time because I want to compare it to what our system can produce. But for anybody that's not looked at it recently, there's normally a 50-50 split or thereabouts of your fixed versus variable usage. And that feels fair to us. If you use more, you should pay more. It's aligned with conservation. We should make sure that people pay for like the most of their water, but it's not really aligned with the utility's business model. The utility is mostly looking at fixed costs. There's not really a price that they pay for water. Sometimes there is if you have to buy water from a neighboring district, but in general, the water itself is like kind of free, which is a whole conversation unto itself. But the cost that the utility is bearing is like the cost of servicing the water, right? The pipes, the infrastructure, the cleaning, all the processing and the staff that they have to deliver that. So they know they have this fixed cost basis but the revenue goes up and down with usage and droughts and all these other things, conservation mandates. They're not always feeling flush with cash, especially if you have big infrastructure projects that can blow through your rainy day fund and cause you to even need grant funding, right? You might be going year to year with literally no savings. So anchoring on some sort of percentage of revenue, I think makes sense. Whether it's like, I think a lot of vertical software companies, you might want to shoot for like 1% and you can get up to like 3, 4, 5% of revenue if you have a lot of great services. But obviously when we started on the lower end of that, knowing that this is probably all the utility can reasonably afford.
And then once people have your product in hand, you've got to make sure that they're actually deriving the value proposition. Can you talk, I don't know whether I can't remember if you call it customer success or whatever it would be, but how do you think about that side of it?
So it starts during the implementation and onboarding period, which is often a point of stress. This is often a reason why people don't want to change, is they don't want to go through the migration process. A lot of people feel like the last migration that they did was such a disaster that they don't want to change, which is extremely infuriating as a new vendor, because it's basically like saying the last vendor did such a bad job that they locked you in to their service because they made you think that all migrations were going to be this bad. But that's something we got a lot of good advice on, was make the transition as seamless and easy as possible. And one advantage we have, I think, is when the product's easy to use, it's also easy to learn. So people find it pretty intuitive. The training process for us, I mean, we do have cases where we need to do relatively intense trainings, but a lot of times we try to do training on the job. Like it'll be part of the exercise of going live. Hey, why don't you, based on what you've learned, you're talking to a customer, why don't you try to bill your customers? Like go through the billing process. It's a 4 or 5 step process. Get as far as you can and give us a call when you get stuck, and we'll hop on a Zoom and we'll help them the rest of the way. And by the end of that, not only have they gone live in our system, but they've kind of learned on the job in a way that's hopefully going to stick with them. And I think you've seen it does stick with them better than just watching a video or reading a document would have been after. So I think with those kinds of approaches, we can both be relatively efficient with our own time, but also provide like high levels of service, right? We're actually responsive. We're getting on the phone with our customers. We're workshopping things with them. After that, it becomes more of a support question, right? So people call in or write in with questions, and we answer those as best we can. We always try to keep an eye on what's the ultimate goal. Jin's from Amazon, and one of the, their big customer obsession, focus culture. He always talks about earning trust, being authentic with the customers, making sure that they understand, hey, if we can't do that for you now, here's why. And talking about it and making sure we have time for all those things. And in many cases with our early customers, sorry, I'm just kind of rambling on all the things that come to mind. They really see that through the features that we want to build. We were acknowledging, hey, we don't have all the features built. And as people use the product, you can talk about all the things that are missing and actually build them. And again, it's kind of funny, your cloud system, like sometimes simple fixes, Jin will just do them on a call and he'll push them. The customer will refresh the browser and the fix that they just requested will be there. We don't do this for all of our customers, but it is kind of a fun thing that you can do every once in a while, and obviously blows them away. So they'll say that in a reference call, like they literally changed the program on the call. Again, we can't promise that every time. Not everything is that simple. But
exactly.
When you can do it, you want to do it quickly.
There'll be a time at which you have to take down that quote.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Literally, how do you do it? You just described like the activity of actually listening to your customer. But as you go and as you build a go-to-market mechanism, you're not going to be on every call. How do you make sure that information flows through? Or is this just sort of a luxury of where the team is now, that everybody's close, tight knit, small amount of people, information flows are good? And if that's the case, how do you plan on maintaining that over time?
That's definitely the phase we're at now, is understanding that we're not going to be able to be on all these calls going forward. I'm already kind of not really as involved on the post-sale side because I'm more involved in the pre-sale side. Jin is on a lot of calls. He reviews all of our support tickets. We do have a dedicated support person now, Jeremy, who's doing a great job kind of handling the first line there. And a lot of our engineers will kind of rotate through and handle second line, right? The more complicated issues, the things that might actually be a bug. It's good to have that set of eyes on there. And we are opening up a role for customer success, which I think will really help as well. Just having a little bit more oversight on the onboarding in particular. And what does it mean to be a successful customer and renew? So far, we have a great foundation to work with. We just started tracking NPS like late last year, and we're at 75. And NPS is one of those that's it's minus 100 to 100. So it's a very strong score. I think it's possible that our customers are just too nice and they don't want to disappoint us. But we also know that that's a big part of our sales motion. Is we're very liberal with references. We just had somebody call 7 references. It was a mistake by one of our sales teammates who sent the entire reference list instead of just the 3 that he was supposed to. But this lady called all 7. And then after doing that, she said, okay, I don't need any more demos. I'm good. Because I talked to 7 people. Or there's even more than that, but I think she just stopped going through the list. Having good references and customer success motion is like a key part of growth. People refer you to each other. Utilities always ask like, hey, who in my state, who in my region have you worked with? And being able to build a good roster there is super, super important. And so it's something that if we can't do it ourselves, we want to make sure that we can bring in people that can kind of continue the way things have been going.
Do they ever ask you about the resilience of the company? Because one of the things about working with an early stage company, maybe they don't know you're early stage and, whatever. But if you disappear, so does their system, which is often a big blocker for people who are trying to kind of get out of the blocks. How have you factored that in your thinking? I mean, obviously everybody wants to be in business for a long time, but this is a really interesting level of responsibility that you have. How do you think about it?
Yeah, we did get asked that more often earlier. I think when it was clear that we were a startup, and it is exactly as you said, it's like the stability. I don't want to be handing over my data and my operations to a company that might just fail. The parts that we can answer concretely is just, how we handle data. We're a cloud system. Your data is your data, which isn't the norm in the industry, actually. Like a lot of times when we're transitioning, people onto our system from other systems, they have to pay like a breakup fee or some sort of data extraction fee to the other provider. So that was very foreign to me. That's not how the world is anymore in terms of cloud systems. It's, yeah, we're hosting it for you, but it's your data, right? We're not trying to like keep it from you. So if you want to leave us or if our company goes under, it is your data and we have an obligation to get it back to you. So that's the one concrete thing we can say. And then other than that, I think the only way you can answer it is just to be as honest as you can about your goals and your ambitions and why you did this. I view that as just trying to communicate to the customer that you're not a mercenary, which we certainly don't feel like we are. We feel like we want to build a real company that has a real impact. That's something that after those first meetings with utilities, you leave so energized, right? Jen and I felt that. And anybody else that's, I think, come with us to visit utilities as we've grown the team, you can see the impact you're having on the customers that you're serving and then what they want to do with your software and how they want to serve their community better by offering them the online tools and communications and things that we do. Like you feel it. And this is very rewarding and fulfilling. And so, if there's ever sort of kind of an exit opportunity, I think this is something that would be top of mind. How do we create continuity for our customers and make sure they're in good hands? So that's all we can say. And we're just hoping that they trust us. The only time it hasn't worked was somebody asked us like what our growth plan was. And I said relatively conservatively, like, I think we can add 2 new utilities a month for the next 12 months. And that'll get us to, whatever it would have been at that time. And we'll be cash flow neutral at that point, something, just kind of a rough estimate. And their board looked at that and said, we don't believe it. We don't want to go with these guys. And I think over that period, we averaged 5 new customers a month. So I did make sure to follow up with him and let him know that we did.
They said that was too high.
Yeah, they said there's no way these guys can do. They said, we don't believe it. They're not going to be able to do it. They're going to go under, basically. And I was like, all right, that was harsh. So I just made sure to update the general manager, like, hey, by the way, we've actually added 5 new customers.
Oh my God, I can only imagine the board member is totally convinced they're right. That's insane. So drawing the line out, you already kind of alluded to where this might go, but you brought up some really big numbers at the top of this. This is an awfully large channel of cash worldwide because it comes into the utility and again, it gets funneled out to everything from chemicals to rebuilding pipes to new treatment plants to whatever it is. What is the biggest version of current?
So it depends on kind of which sections you want to attack of the market. So starting with that 500 billion, I think the easiest way to do the market sizing is just kind of top down from that 500 billion. If you think you can build a bunch of systems in there that can capture 3 to 5% of the revenue of this industry, that's 15 to 25 billion. And then from a bottoms up perspective, you just have to figure out what are those modules. Right now, we're basically selling a utility billing module and customer payment portal to the small utilities. Now, that's obviously just a fraction of the market. Where can you go? You go up market, sell to larger and larger utilities, figure out what they need. This is where kind of more novel technologies like artificial intelligence or fintech could be really interesting. Large utilities might need an entire ERP system that can help them connect. You started this with wanting to talk about money, right? So we're only thinking about the way money comes in the door, but what about money that they want to maintain for themselves? We had an interesting board meeting that we joined when I was pitching, and the topic right before whether they should go with our system was their cash management strategy. And they just figured out that, hey, we can actually use a high yield savings account for our utility. And that was allowed. So they were doing that. And that's huge to do in this day and age, right? With inflation, costs going up everywhere. Like, how can we earn some yield, right? On our cash balances. You start to hear these things and realize, okay, there's a lot of ways that the fintech solutions that are out there can help in not just how you bring money in, but how you earn money on what you have. And then maybe how you're a little bit more efficient about how you distribute it, right? I get paid 90% plus with paper checks, right? So how can we streamline that piece of it? Thinking about the surface area of, is it the size of utility that you're going after? Is it also thinking about cities as well and kind of broadening your service area in that way, or kind of the depth of services or all the directions you can go? But overall, easily 15 billion plus in terms of the market opportunity.
No, it really is amazing once you kind of like peel back the onion on all of the various verticals of all of the things that really need to be done in terms of the moving of cash, people paying for X, Y, Z. There is a lot to solve. And having a toll booth, obviously like a toll booth that provides a spectacular amount of value is awesome.
It's a great point. I think the old school way is just, set up a toll booth, right? And just that's sometimes something you see in this space is that you feel like you have a captive customer base. But if you think about, hey, what are they getting when they pay that toll? I think it's really powerful. And we've seen that with the online payment processing. There is a fee associated with online payments, which nobody wants to pay, but it's just kind of the way it is, right? Starting from the interchange that you charge from credit card companies. But when you put all that data in one system, it saves a tremendous amount of time for customers. And so then it turns from a toll to an obvious positive ROI to move people onto e-payments. So I think that's when we decide where we want to go. It's really based on, if this is a monetization opportunity, are we sure that this is actually creating excess value for the utility to be paying us for that kind of financial transaction cost? or whatever it is.
100%. Yeah, I absolutely do not mean to infer that you were just raising a barrier and that was your value
Sure.
proposition, right? One of the things that I wanted to ask is what are the second order effects that you've seen? Because you're at the intersection of some really interesting goings on. I mean, 50% of meters at the moment in the US. Every time I say this out loud, I am stunned, but still need to be read by hand. But actually having a kind of relatively sophisticated data system is going to be able to tell you all sorts of anomalies. And obviously, Christine's been pretty close to that problem for some time.
Yeah.
But the sort of the base of data that you're interacting with, thanks to Subeka and others, is going to be rapidly improving. So yeah, the second order effects, is there anything kind of interesting that you've seen already of people being able to pick up on stuff that, managerially they wouldn't have been able to see before your system came along?
Yeah, I think this is just the thing you hear all the time at any utility conferences. We're data rich, insight poor. And so that's the role that we think we can play, is to kind of help connect the dots there. Subeka, as an example, as an AMI provider, right? They have all of this data, and I don't know in their case in particular, but I think broadly speaking, people are like, okay, I'm sitting on all of these hourly or up to the minute meter reads, but what information can I actually get out of it? So that's definitely something that we try to help the utilities with by like filtering that through and saying, hey, here's your highest reads. Here are the people that have had a certain amount of usage that we've seen over a certain amount of time that is non-zero. So that's probably indicative of a leak. These are intelligence layers that the utility can apply on their side to kind of manage their organization and decide, okay, like this is how much water we're actually consuming, but maybe we won't be at that level next year if we can tamp down on these leaks, right? So that has implications for revenue, as well as how do we want to communicate this to our customers? And that's the big piece that I think we've grown into over time with our customer-facing tools, is adding that communication layer. So we have all the customer data, we have their email address, their phone number, their history, right? How do we help utilities set up campaigns to actually reach out to the customers that they need to reach out to? I think it's a little early to say like what the full range of that is, but I think it's the part of our company that is a little bit different in terms of how we think about it, right? We feel like we're not directly on the front lines of anything like resource conservation or anything like that, but having tools like ours where you can connect the information that you need to execute those plans, I think we're an important cog in that machine, I would argue. So that's the part that I think those types of projects always get a little bit extra attention. People are always excited to work on those because it kind of comes with a little bit more reward, I would say, in terms of the output that you're hopefully producing.
Well, in terms of behavior change, when you have something as revolutionary as an app, it could make a really significant difference. I cannot wait to hear what the answer to that question is in 2 years, because there is going to be all sorts of really funky stuff in terms of second order effect of what you're doing by codifying this particular kind of like overall vertical. So many things are going to get better.
I think we're still at a first order effect. We had a story recently from a customer that recently switched to us, and it was the first time they had an online payment portal. And the utility administrator gave us a call and said, hey, I just want to let you know, I was just stopped in the grocery store by a constituent who was like, oh my God, thank God you guys finally got this payment portal. I'm so excited about that. So that's the call you get. And you're kind of like, what just happened in this small town? That this is like news. It's news that this happened. But Tom, I think you're in some ways in the future, in your role as a venture capitalist, you're thinking about all the awesome things that could happen. But in a lot of places, we're just a couple steps behind. Like we just need to be able to get somebody access to view their own usage online. And they're like, wow, this is cool. I can actually see it. I can log in when I want. It's a small community where you know who your billing clerk is. You probably know them by name. They know you by name. They know your usage, and you just give them that feedback. So we love hearing that. And again, that's just kind of painting the picture of the average customer that we have.
Nobody listening to this could see me, but I was literally punching the air as Barrett said that. It's one of my favorite things. Lights came on when Doppler was a good example of this. This is the first time that people were able to thank their utility for doing a good job and dealing with a problem. Like the utility workers were so stunned that anybody had anything nice to say to them, because they're usually only on the receiving end of people saying bad thing happening, and it's zero fun. That's so great. I love that. Barry, you're in San Francisco. It's all AI all the time. It's, hyperscalers or bust, ding dong, hey ho, let's go. And you're building we think a magnificent business, but you're building a magnificent business in water. What is that like? How do people react when you say what you're doing?
I have started having some fun with this, where when people ask, hey, what do you do for work? I'll just look them in the eye and say, I sell software to water utilities, and kind of watch the panic on their face as they think about, oh my God, what follow-up questions do I have for this? How do I get out of this conversation as quickly as possible?
So good.
So aside from that, I mean, in general, if I get a chance to explain a little bit more about light versions of this conversation, why we're interested in it, like the opportunity we see, why it's so important to the communities to have these kind of online tools and what people see in it. I think most people understand, and they see that, hey, there's a lot of AI companies out there. There's so many AI for whatever's now that like we're probably good there. Like it's interesting to see that somebody's looking into an area that other people wouldn't have thought of. I hope it kind of makes an impact on others that think, hey, we should be looking farther afield than just AI for sales, AI for note taking or whatever. Like nothing against any of those companies, but we have probably 100 of each of them. It's obviously interesting to be at the epicenter here. We have, because I think by legal decree here in San Francisco, we have launched an AI chatbot in our product. I don't think you're allowed to exist in the state without some sort of AI feature. So we have dabbled in that ourselves, but it's obviously much more skeptically received in our industry than anywhere else because they want to make sure it's right. They want to make sure it's accurate. It's got to actually solve a real problem. There's nobody out there saying, hey, I got to get AI in my utility. You were held to a little bit higher standard, I think, than other AI companies where a lot of exploratory budgets right now at large companies to check out what's new, right? And stay on top of the trends. So that's definitely an interesting trend to follow, like what's working in other industries versus what we think we can apply in ours.
These people who still pick up the phone. If I pick the phone 9 times out of 10, it's somebody informing me that I have some debt facility somewhere. It's just, firstly, AI needs to be correct. And that is something that AI is not that good at, especially when the data that is required for it to be correct is not easily accessible. And secondly, trust. It needs to be just without that degree of correctness. It's going to be really interesting to see how it develops. We obviously have examples of it, but it's going to be so interesting as to how it shows up in your life. But as you say, it is statutorily required in the state, in the state of California, particularly in the northern half of it, to have the bot. So well done, you. We only have one more question, which is the question we ask all of our guests, which is, if you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would it be?
Yeah, I think I'd go back to the difference between the pain that a customer's experiencing versus that buying trigger. I just had a customer reach back out, another mutual water company. We met them 2.5 years ago. They had the same pain that I think a lot of other of our first customers had. And they were one of the ones I kept thinking every quarter, hey, they're going to close. And they never did. They just didn't have that urgency. They finally did. Something changed in the organization. They reached back out 2 months ago, and now we're going to board next month. So it's one of those things where, look, the traditional way of selling just pain, like I think it's only going to get you so far here. It's hopefully going to be a great customer relationship just 2.5 years later. And you can't run your business that way. You can't run your business with that level of uncertainty. And you need to understand kind of what's going to make somebody make a decision today. And I think that's been the biggest change in our trajectory, is identifying when are people ready to make that decision and what is actually driving that decision this month.
Pain versus trigger. That's excellent. As is all of the rest of your facets of company building. We are huge fans of you and your team. Really, congratulations on what you're building. It is so sorely needed, and I cannot wait to see what the years to come bring. Really, congratulations. You're a really world-class entrepreneur doing the right thing for the right reasons, and it's an absolute privilege to watch. Thank you so much for coming on The Fundamental Molecule.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words, and thanks for having me.